and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Dry Fire Mag. Dry Fire Mag solves the common and annoying problem of having to rack the slide every time you pull the trigger in dry fire training. With the Dry Fire Mag, you can build good habits by having a trigger that will reset so you can prep the trigger for the next shot without taking your other hand off the gun. You can find them at dryfiremag.com.
This is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption of water into the parts of your body that need it the most. You can find it on dripdrop.com or even on Amazon. And if you're military or law enforcement and your organization is training or operating in hot weather, have your supply guy buy it for you. It's available on GSA Advantage and through the National Stock Number System. Mike, tonight I want to talk about the tactical fantasy.
Ooh, sounds naughty.
Yeah, hopefully we're not going to go down any naughty paths, but it is a bad effing habit. And it's a habit that I've noticed across all of the tactical communities. And I use that term a lot. When I say that, I'm referring to cops, military, and civilian concealed carriers and survival prepper types. And what I mean when I say tactical fantasy is guys and gals tend to fixate on a scenario playing out exactly one way. And sometimes that one way is totally detached from reality. Now, there's always going to be a divide between your preparation and reality. Like that's life, right? You can't perfectly predict the future, but we have a responsibility as tacticians to be good at this and to close that gap. And you got to recognize when the gap is hitting stupid levels.
And for me, the way that I view some of this is that we have to distinguish what are mental imagery and visualization and rehearsals, which are a good thing. We have to distinguish those things from fantasy, right? And so the typical way that I try to explain this to people when I talk about it is when you've got a police officer who talks about being ambushed in their police car as an excuse for not wearing their seatbelt. It's stuff like that where, yeah, it sounds real tactical to be like, well, it's counter ambush technique. It's tactical. And, the reality is that car crashes kill more cops than most shootings combined, let alone things like after retirement, dealing with stuff like heart disease because of the crappy choices that we've made throughout our careers and all those other things. So it's trying to get some grasp of the difference between doing a mental rehearsal and imagining yourself going through certain tasks, which is an important part of the job. What if this? What if that? What if the other thing? And the fantasies that we have about like how we're going to go down in like a raging epic gun battle.
There was a firefight.
Yeah, there was a firefight. Something that, it could happen, but the odds of that happening versus the much more simple, mundane things is a lot. Those don't match up. And that's the mismatch that we want to address in this episode.
We got to close the gap. And what we don't want is for movies and bad TV shows to drive our procedures or our training or our preparation in general. And that's a problem because the way your brain is wired tends to make you want to do that. And we'll talk about that as we go. Two key ideas I want to get through up front is the term algorithm and the OODA loop, or observe, orientation, decision, action, OODA cycle. So algorithm, when we say that, we're talking about your decision tree, kind of your mental checklist of, if this happens, then I'm going to do that. If this happens, then I'm going to do this, right? And the goal to speed up your decision cycle is to make most of your decisions before the gunfight, or before the disaster, or before the plane crash. You want to make all those decisions up front in a 0 airspeed, 0 G, 0 altitude environment, a 0 environment. Because that's when you have all of your faculties, and that's when you can Google stuff and you can consult with experts, because when the chips are down, you just got to go. You got to, make decisions and act so that you're not frozen with, analysis paralysis, right? So you have to visualize what the future is going to look like so you can build out your decision tree a little bit.
Yeah, so the goal is to make sure that most of the problems that you're going to interact with are things that you've already thought of. And it doesn't mean that you have a solution to every problem, but you at least have a frame of reference to compare it to. And it's something like, if I'm teaching a new cop the difference between a shoot and a no-shoot scenario, it starts out very basic, very binary, shoot or no shoot. Okay, you walk in a room and there's a guy with a gun in his hand. Shoot him. You have this fairly straightforward, he's pointing a gun at me. Okay, go ahead and shoot him. Well, when you start to complicate that is when you start adding things like, okay, well, he's got a knife or a lead pipe. And now you start to have to ask yourself, well, how far away is he? What's between me and him? What's his behavior like? Are there other people around? And it gets more and more complicated. So at least now, when you're confronted with a situation where, well, this is unlike anything I've ever seen before, you have something to draw from. You have experience to draw from to start making those decisions. And one of the key parts about this, in terms of coming up with an algorithm, which is not the point of the show, but it's relevant to this fantasy thing, because you're talking about trying to tease out this decision-making tree, right, is the difference between methods and principles. So principles is something that deals with, the nature of the beast, if you will, in terms of a tactical scenario, right? Yep. The 21-foot principle is to illustrate the difference between action versus reaction and having initiative in a fight. That's a principle. It's not a method. It doesn't tell me what to do with a guy who has a knife and is 21 feet away from me, right? It's not a method. It's a principle. Where this gets really difficult, though, is putting it into action. So, okay, I understand the principle of the 21-foot thing, right? We're not going to call it a rule, but the 21-foot principle talks about the difference between action versus reaction. How do I put that into action, right? Now, what do I do with it? The way that we talk about this in my little circle is time, distance, and shielding. You want to put stuff between you and them. You want to do things to compress your reaction time so that you can react quicker since they have some initiative. And distance obviously is a factor there. So time, distance, and shielding is one way to kind of think about it. But another illustration that I'll give you is we have a rule in law enforcement called the +1 rule. And the +1 rule is one of those things where, okay, you could call it a rule, but do people ever actually do it? And that's part of the problem. So if I'm searching a house, I always assume that there is one more person that I don't know about, right? You walk inside, hey, is anyone else home? Nope, it's just me and her. You have to assume that the uncle that's wanted for murder is in the back room, right? You always assume there's one more than you know about. And so that tells you if you go to an alarm call, right? And someone broke into some business, you're searching the business, and you know that there was information that only one person made it inside, you have to assume there's at least two.
Yep.
So we have this rule, we've discussed this thing, that's a common knowledge principle, right? The +1 rule. Well, a little while back, one of my coworkers, one of the other dog handlers in my unit, was out on a search and made a mistake. Didn't follow the +1 rule, searched an area, found a guy hiding under a car, pulled the dog away. He was taken into custody, continued on with the search because several people were caught, doing whatever crime it was. I don't remember exactly, but when they went back to search for the rest of the people, they didn't find anybody. And it turns out there was a second person under that car, up under, like wrapped around the axle of this truck, right? They found one person under the car. So when the dog was telling the handler, there's a guy right here.
He was right.
The dog was correct, right? They pulled the dog back. They gave announcements. The guy came out, surrendered, taken into custody. Everything was good. But the +1 rule tells us what? That there's a second person under there. We have to assume that there's more than one that we know about. Now, where this gets a little bit challenging in the canine universe is if that person was hiding under there for X number of minutes or hours or whatever it was, the human odor is going to be there even after the person leaves. So the dog is going to go apeshit regardless. The dog is going to assume, and as a handler, I know that. I know that if I put my dog back under there, he's going to behave as if there's a person because there was just a person. The dog's reacting to odor, not just presence, right? So it gets a little bit tricky in the canine realm, but the idea here is that you still have to assume that there's a second body, right? And we still need to, trust but verify that we have that second person. So a key thing that I want you to think about going through this episode is how do you take these principles and apply them to your reality, your real life scenarios? Because these fantasies, that's where we start to get a little bit wrapped up in them, because if you think about imagery and visualization and mental rehearsals, that's part of your planning process, right? Those things are going to have some scars left behind in real life.
Yep. And you just have to make sure they're grounded in reality, that you're not just daydreaming about how the fight's going to go or how many people there's going to be or whatever. And you're going to see this go into that over and over, and you're going to see us bounce around some of these principles as we go to help ground your visualization into reality, or lessons learned that were written in blood.
Yeah, and I have one more thought on this, actually, now that I think about it and take a breath. The other way that I see this play out a lot is just about any police officer that I've ever talked to has gone through getting in a shooting in their mind, and they've done that mental rehearsal imagery exercise, and they've visualized everything that they're going to do. And one of the components of that always involves getting on the radio and saying, your designator, shots fired, right? You have to announce it to the world. And yeah, it's also a call for help, right? It's a call for assistance, but they get on the radio and they're like, 1 Adam, whatever, shots fired. And they have to and so they've rehearsed that so many times in their head when they're going through these what if scenarios. What am I going to do if? That when it actually happens, when they actually get in a shooting, they'll get on the radio, they'll hit the play button on that script that they've played in their head over and over and over and over and over. And they'll get on the radio and say shots fired, even if it's not an appropriate time to do it. And it's because they've, in their mind, they've created a habit, right? And so where all this plays out and what this means for us when you're thinking about these little fantasies that you have in your head is the importance of follow through in your training. Your scenarios need to play out all the way to the end. Not just at, okay, you exchange gunfire with this guy and he's down on the ground. Well, what if he gets back up? What if he's still got the weapon with him? What if he decides to, you shoot him and he runs away and you're thinking, oh my God, is he going to run around the corner and fall over dead, or is he out in the neighborhood and alive? So you have to follow through the whole thing and not just cut yourself short in those rehearsals.
And you also don't want to be just the monkey or the robot executing a procedure rote all the time. You have to be thinking about what you're doing and why, right?
Yeah.
In Air Force pilot training, we teach young pilots the engine shutdown procedure. It's boldface, it's memory work. They have to be just recited off over and over and over. They have to write it out perfectly. And you have to be careful what you're conditioning your people to do. If you're conditioning them to shut down the motor, guess what they're going to do the second they see the little flashing master warning light? They're going to shut down the motor, whether they need to or not, in some cases.
Right, wrong, or indifferent. Yep.
Or the wrong motor. But man, they're going to execute the boldface procedures just like you taught them, right? So that's one thing, is understand algorithms, understand the checklist mindset and where it can get you into trouble if you write your checklist poorly or you don't ground your checklist in reality, right? That's thing one. Thing two, the OODA loop, OODA. We've done episodes about this. There are books about it. The book Boyd by Robert Karam is worth reading. There was a guy named Boyd. Long story short, he came up with a way of thinking about how people operate when they're in a conflict. And they go through observing, processing through an orientation phase, making a decision about it and acting on it. And then that cycle repeats and repeats and repeats as their action hits reality, gets feedback from the guy they're fighting, right? And orientation, the way you look at the world, tends to shape all the other things. It gives you your list of things you're willing to consider as options. It tells you where to look. And so if your orientation, which is the sum of your training and education experience, your religious views, all that, if it's screwy and disconnected from reality, your list of things that you see as viable options will be screwy and disconnected from reality. What you look at will be screwy and disconnected from reality. This is a thing Mike and I talk about a lot, is what do you look at in someone who's threatening you? Do you look at their eyeballs or do you look at their hands? And culturally, we are taught to look at eyeballs because they're windows to the soul, and you can glean some information about eyeballs, but eyeballs aren't going to kill you. Hands are what's going to kill you. And that's counterintuitive to a lot of people. They have to be taught, look at hands, look at hands, look at hands.
So there's an important mechanism, though, to make that happen. The reason that cops, for example, have learned to look at the hands is because they've got a whole bunch of experience to back up the fact that looking at someone's eyes doesn't help you solve the problems. What really solves the problems is what's in their hands. And police officers have a lot of experience to draw on in seeing that the eyes won't tell you how quickly the person is going to kill you. There's still useful information. They can tell you if someone is lying to you. They can tell you if they're looking at escape routes, but they do not account for all the times that they have attacked police officers, which is more reliably determined by what's in their hands. And because of the amount of experience to draw on, we have all of that data, which is something that you have to be careful about, because although we might have a lot of data, what we also have is a lot of anecdotes. So, for example, when someone says, well, I have a 1911 45 and I've never had a malfunction, well, that doesn't mean that they've shot it enough or in the right circumstances and right conditions to really challenge that gun. And so we can't just rely on one person's story to really go by. So there's a little bit of a difference between anecdotes and data, but it's happened enough times, enough police officers have been killed that we've been able to determine that what's in someone's hands or what they're doing with their hands is a really big determining factor in knowing what's going to happen next.
Yep. And risk management drives a lot of our tactics and our decisions about what's worth training to and what's worth equipping for and what's worth prepping for, and whatever that means to you. Prepping in this case could be how much canned food and toilet paper you keep in your house, or it could be what equipment you carry on your duty belt in law enforcement, or what scenarios you train against in aviation, right? So risk management is all about how likely is something to hurt me and how severe is it going to be if it does? And then what can I do to buy down my risk, right? Make it either less likely or less severe. And to do that, to even have a chance at doing that, you need good data, just like Mike was saying. And you have to interpret that data well, because it's easy to misinterpret data, and it's really hard to come by good data. There are a couple sources that can kind of help you. We try to give you good data. We try to point you in the direction of good data. The FBI puts out the Uniform Crime Report, and the Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Statistics puts out a bunch of statistical information about what gets people hurt and killed. The Officer Down Memorial page tracks causes of death, of line of duty deaths for law enforcement. There are like 17,000 YouTube videos. And I gotta be careful anytime I point out YouTube videos, right? Because a lot of those are anecdotes. It's one specific instance that happened to be captured on film, and it's whatever the camera happened to pick up. But the interesting thing about having so many YouTube videos now is we actually do have a statistically significant number of events that we can track. And that's where, like Active Self-Protection, their program and their YouTube channel is all about taking the lessons from thousands of those incidents. Now, one caution I have on a lot of those YouTube videos is consider maybe there might be some biases as far as where the events take place. Many of those happen in South Africa. Some of them happen in Brazil with people who have different upbringing, different culture, different approach to fighting than maybe somebody in Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles would have, right? So, but you can use that to kind of inform you a little bit. And you have to watch for other biases and statistics. Ask yourself, what's not being caught on camera? Survivor bias. If no one is left to tell the story, you're only hearing part of the story, and you're not hearing the worst outcomes in some cases. So you need good data. And also, you have to account for the most dangerous scenarios and the most likely scenarios, train to both. And that's where the art and science of tactical decision-making comes in, is the balance. How often am I training for worst case scenario? And what does that even mean? And how often am I training for the daily mundane stuff? And one of the things I would remind you is the dangerous stuff often isn't the sexy, exciting stuff.
Yeah, and I'll go back to my example I gave in the very beginning, which is like car accidents and heart disease, right? Like if you were a police officer and you never go to the shooting range and you never learn how to fight, your odds of surviving your career without getting a medical retirement or killed in the line of duty from gunfire or a criminal assault is pretty good. But the whole time throughout that career, you didn't work out either. You didn't look at your weight or your diet either. You didn't go get your cholesterol checked either. And so, you know, if you're not training any of those things, obviously it's an even bigger problem. But again, looking at the odds, your odds of heart disease being an American, not even public safety personnel, just living in America for 20, 40, 50 years, whatever, is not good for your health to begin with in many cases. So the stuff that you could train for, I mean, sure, yeah, you could go down to the range, you could do those things, but like daily exercise and taking care of just your wellness, your emotional wellness, you know, and good, healthy family life and some of those things is something that you have to put effort forth for. So making sure that you're looking at this from 30,000 feet, I think, is an important part of this.
Yep. So human nature distorts your perceptions of likely and dangerous. It tends to magnify purposeful threats with a agency, right? Someone who intends harm to you. And it tends to diminish the threats that are actually going to really hurt you. So just like Mike was saying with heart disease versus active shooters, you've probably thought a lot more about how you're going to fight an active shooter than a heart attack. Well, I got news for you, right? In terms of protecting your kids, it's easy to visualize a kidnapper, like some stranger at the park walking up to you. It's hard to visualize sometimes drownings. Which one do you think kills more kids? Police on a traffic stop. I think it's easy for most law enforcement officers to picture the muzzle of a gun coming out of the driver's side window as they walk up. I think most cops have probably visualized that and what they're going to do. Do you also visualize the distracted soccer mom coming up behind you in a minivan? I think you need to do both, right? And again, we're wired to visualize some threats over others.
For whatever reason, I think the emotional connection with violence is just, I don't even know if it's a sexy thing. I think it's like a deliberate, purposeful thing. It's not this thing that's in the background is going to kill me. And you're not just thinking about like the chance. Yeah, car accidents, there's a chance that something could happen, but it's not like this guy coming up to me on this day, he chose me, you know, or this active shooter is, I mean, I don't know. It's just, it's part of the way that we just go through this, but in a more practical way, the way that it plays out is when you think about even those violent encounters, right? Even the emotionally connected, the emotionally charged, deliberate attacks, if you will, that come out of a lot of things. I mean, first of all, we have to acknowledge, and I'm not telling you that I'm prepared to be a victim of no robbery myself, but like the guy that comes up to me at the ATM and says, empty your bank account and give me your money, is going to get a gun in the face, right? Like I could sit there all day and tell you that that's what's going to happen, but it's sometimes not so simple to think in those terms, because I think what happens is part of that emotional draw to those sorts of encounters is to like fluff ourselves up a little bit, right? It's to make ourselves feel better about ourselves. And so we are so badass that if some guy tries to rob me, well, life is about choices and play stupid games, win stupid prizes. I'm going to shoot that mother effer, you know, and it's like, okay, I agree. Like if someone tried to come steal my shit, like I'm probably going to put up a fight. I'm here to tell you, but you have to think about, you know, going back to my point earlier about methods versus principles. You can have that state of mind. that, okay, I understand what this principle means, but it only counts if I put it into action. And if you walk up to the ATM and you're not paying attention, and now this guy's got the drop on you, right? The gun to your head, or he's got your wife at gunpoint holding her like a hostage or something like that. It's like, well, now whatever you thought you were going to do just got a wrench thrown into the middle of it. And so your plan that, I'm just going to shoot him. He's going to get a gun in the face and that's what's going to happen. Well, it gets a little bit more weird when you weren't paying attention and now this person is coming from a position of advantage. So I think that's part of it, is we're trying to fluff ourselves up. And that's why this goes, that's why that becomes a fantasy, because it's not really grounded in the bigger picture, which is those fantasies, those emotional connections that we have, the things that we think about, only matter if our situational awareness is up to par, our preparedness, our risk management is up to par. We're thinking about, is the juice worth the squeeze on every one of those scenarios that we might get into and what our possible outcomes might be.
Yep. There's your fluffing yourself up thing. That's going to take us down a good rabbit trail. There's a movie called Act of Valor. It's a movie by SEALs for SEALs about SEALs, because that's what Navy SEALs like to do. They like to make movies. But there are a lot of really great parts in that movie. And one of the lines, it says, one of the worst parts about getting old is that other men don't see you as dangerous. And it is a big part of the male psyche, at least in the West and in America, that you want to be able to perceive yourself as potentially dangerous, and you want others to see you as someone who can, repel borders, right? But that's where your fantasy and your reality have to mesh, right? When you wear the t-shirt that says UFC on it, you need to make sure your body doesn't say KFC. And if you're going to be a concealed carrier and you're going to defend yourself at that ATM, but you go to the range maybe once a year and you sit at the bench and you shoot, and you don't practice drawing, you don't practice drawing from your appendix in the waistband holster and stuff like that, and you don't practice the words that you're going to have to say as you do that to distract them long enough to get the gun out, you ain't ready. And that's important, is recognize when you ain't ready. And also, my worldview, of course I'm gonna defend myself if I have to, but I'm also gonna bear in mind that, like, money usually isn't worth dying for. My car usually isn't worth dying for or killing somebody for, frankly. And so the phrase, well, like, I'd just shoot him, is problematic, because you can't always just shoot him, and you shouldn't always just shoot him. So, if you get too cowboy, you're just asking for a lot of trouble, and you're getting this really, really narrow binary decision-making process of, if there's trouble, I'll shoot him. Well, that's going to be tough to explain sometimes to juries. That's going to be tough to explain sometimes to yourself in the mirror, or to your daughter after you shoot her boyfriend because you heard something go thump in the night and your only answer was to shoot. Right? So you need to think a couple layers past the I would just shoot him fantasy. I'm going to jump topics a little bit. I want you to think about what options are available to your opponent. Right? When you get into that scenario at the ATM or in your living room, think about what can the other guy do. And this is a big part of the OODA loop thing, is what decisions are available to the other guy. What are their courses of action, right? So picture it's 3 a.m, your window gets shattered, you get out your 1911 and you hold your flashlight up over your head.
You got an AR pistol, I'm sure.
Oh, you got your AR pistol, you got your shotgun.
Actually, but it's a 300 blackout, because your understanding is that, like, that's a cooler bullet
for silencers. That's what the SEALs carry or whatever. You got your flashlight up over your head because some guy in a concealed carry class taught you to do that because you don't want your flashlight too close to your gun or whatever.
Because that's what they're going to shoot at, right?
Yeah, and you somersault down the hallway and you see the dude in your living room, right? First off, when you picture that, do you picture a dude? Or do you picture a dude plus one guy behind you? The plus one thing, right? So say there is just one guy, okay? What options are available to that one guy? You might have heard the phrase fight, flight, or freeze, or posture. He might do any of those 3 things or 4 things. There are some other things he might do too. So do you have a plan for if he just freezes because he's terrified because you got a flashlight over your head and a shotgun out, right? Or, you rack the shotgun. And, yeah, you rack the shotgun and everyone within 5 miles shits themselves because, oh my God, the racking of a shotgun is so, universal language, right?
It's my understanding how that's supposed to go.
Yeah. So he might just freeze and shit his pants. Maybe he might try to fight you. Okay, well, you've probably thought through what that's going to look like. He's going to try and shoot you. You're going to shoot him right back. You're going to get in the big Keanu Reeves gunfight. It's going to be great. The most likely scenario is he's going to bolt like a bunny rabbit, right? He probably didn't even know you were there. And he is going to just run as fast as he can. You going to shoot him in the back? Is that your plan? How's that going to go for you if you do? I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm saying think about that and think about how you're going to defend that decision. He might comply and surrender. Throw his hands up. Hey, you got me. Well, now what? So you're in your boxers with your gun and your flashlight. Where's your cell phone? Are you going to ask Alexa to call 911 for you? Siri?
It's not a terrible plan, actually.
Yeah, we've talked about that in previous episodes. He might feign compliance. Or he might feign a medical emergency. Oh, I'm having a heart attack. Oh my God. Right? What are you going to do then? You going to give him CPR? You going to tell him, well, play stupid games, win stupid prizes? He might actually have a medical emergency. Say he does no shit have a meth-addled heart attack in your living room. Now what?
Or in a lot of cases, that I shouldn't say a lot, but in several previous cases, there have been examples where the medical emergency led them into your house. Like, dude is either drunk or, in fact, this happened to one of our SWAT sergeants one time. He lives right down by the college in town, and he came out to breakfast one morning, and there's like some college kid sleeping on his couch. Like, what? I mean, it could be a medical emergency that someone is disoriented, ends up in the house because they're like, what are you doing in my kitchen? And you're like, I'm sorry, you're in my kitchen, mother, and now that's a real thing that could happen.
Oh, by the way, he might not be a 20-year-old meth addict. He could be an 80-year-old with dementia or Alzheimer's. You going to shoot him? Right? Speaking of that, you need to consider the weird ones. Like, he might try to burn the place down. That's a thing that barricaded subjects do from time to time. There was this thing called Waco that burned down. I don't know who started the fire. It's not my business. What is my business is the place burned down, right? He might cluck like a chicken because, his meds are interacting with his meth. You don't know, right? He could do a lot of different things, and you need to have a plan for what are you going to do? What are you going to say? What are you going to do with your hands? How are you going to call 911? So I have a story about this, about how you picture things going versus how they actually go. This one time, I was a lieutenant. I was in a flight suit. I had come home to my apartment after work.
Were you a lump?
I was about to be. That's a little literary foreshadowing. A lieutenant under mental pressure.
Lieutenant under mental pressure.
Which is basically all the time as a lieutenant. So this is Langley Air Force Base, Southern Virginia, and the town was called Hampton, which was rough by Virginia standards, I would say. So I'm going to my apartment, and between my car, about 21 feet away, let's say, in front of my front door, there was a guy with a machete. And I'm going through my little decision tree, right? I'm thinking through, okay, well, I'll draw my gun and drop this guy, except I'm in a flight suit. I don't have a gun. I'm not allowed to carry a gun in the military. How weird is that? So I'm literally reaching for the gun that isn't there. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not going to work because there is no gun. And I'm looking at the guy. I'm looking at his hands. I'm seeing a big fucking knife in his hands. And I'm like, okay. I'm thinking through like I'm thinking through my verbal judo or my gerbil voodoo or whatever. I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I'm going to say to this guy. Hi. He's walking toward me. And I'm like, well, I can't get to my car and get the car started and drive off before he's hacking my head off. And he looks weird, but not particularly aggressive, right? And there's a difference between weird and aggressive. And this is a good example of you got to use your brain a little bit, right? And so I say, well, I don't want to indicate myself as prey, so I'm going to walk toward him. So I took a step toward him, and he said, hey, don't move. I'm not going to kill you, man, but you're about to step on a snake. And he ran up and hacked the snake's head off. And he's like, there's a nest of them. I've been killing them all day. And I'm like, thanks, crazy machete guy.
There's more over there at my neighbor's house. He's a dick.
And, we're getting into those stories later. But yeah, like in 1,000 years, I did not anticipate that scenario. It just wouldn't have occurred to me. I'm still dumbfounded. I'm still under mental pressure about how that thing went. And if I had a gun, how would that have gone? I probably would have drawn down on him and been like, "Stop! Don't move." And then we would have had a discussion. We would have had that discussion at about 20 feet.
I just can't believe you had to deal with living in an apartment, man. It's lieutenant life.
I know. It was rough. I had to move stocks around. So, and that brings up a good point about not the lieutenant thing, but the people be crazy thing, fog and friction, right? We did an episode about this, about fog and friction. Fog being the drop in situational awareness that you're going to have in a fight, and friction being anything that impedes you from doing normal stuff, doing what it is you're trying to do. And what you need to understand is humans be fucking crazy. Humans do unpredictable shit. And in fact, in a fight, humans are going to go out of their way to be unpredictable, right? They're going to try to deceive you. They're going to try to feign you. And you have to account for that in fighting. And by the way, rational people tend to avoid fights. That means you're likely dealing with irrational people.
Yeah, it's like trying to reason with drunk people, right? It doesn't go well most of the time. And so you kind of have to just talk in circles until you can get what you want. But there's an interesting, I guess, second side to this story, which is related to a book that I read once called Predictably Irrational. And I don't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but it had to do with a concept in psychology called behavioral economics, dealing with the way that humans make decisions. And the interesting thing about the unpredictable or irrational things that people do is, in a lot of ways, they actually are predictable.
Yep.
There are many things that we can anticipate. So this goes into that whole, like, if you think about sympathetic nervous responses, fight or flight response, right? Those things are actually pretty predictable. And Jim earlier talked about the guy that's in your house. You go downstairs, you confront him, and he just freezes there. That is something that we see in law enforcement often. And what a lot of cops will write that up as after their use of force that's inevitably going to follow is that he was non-compliant. And the question that you have to ask yourself, which we know from the studies and the data of all of the officer-involved shootings that have occurred, is that under stress, people will experience auditory exclusion. So are they not complying with you? Are they not listening? Or are they not hearing? That's an important distinction, right? If they are hitting that sympathetic nervous
I done told them once.
threshold, yeah. If they're hitting that realm of sympathetic nervous response, and you know that they're prone to auditory exclusion, then what can you do to alter your approach to that individual to maybe soften the impact of that stress so that they can get to a more rational point of view and start listening to what you're telling them, right? So it's an important part of, it's one of my big criticisms whenever I talk about the Daniel Shaver, the Mesa, Arizona hotel room shooting where he comes out in the hallway and they're screaming at that guy. And if you haven't seen the video, go look it up. Daniel Shaver, Mesa, Arizona, officer-involved shooting. And the guy comes out of the hotel room. He's basically compliant. He's subconsciously trying to pull up his pants, which is, again, predictably irrational, right? You're telling the guy, put your hands up. But if your pants are falling, do you think that you're going to go reach down and try to pull them up without a thought?
I've got 38 years of pulling my pants up. I've got 10 seconds of you screaming at me to keep my hands up. Which one do you think I'm going to do? Right.
And so it's just a natural, it's just a reaction. It's subconscious, right? And so then you're screaming at this guy, making him even more assed up. And now he's really not thinking clearly because conscious and rational thoughts are thwarted by survival-oriented behaviors. So yes, humans will be unpredictable and they will do irrational things, but there are many of those things that we can anticipate, those behaviors that we can anticipate. There are some patterns and some rhythms there that we can kind of consider. And you can't bank everything on that, but you should at least weigh those into your decision making a little bit. And I think that book, Predictably Irrational, it's not really about anything survival related. It's more about things. It's actually more about like marketing and you know, why the Humane Society puts sad pictures of dogs in their commercials and stuff like that. Because people, if you put a picture of a dog and it's sad, that you will automatically emotionally connect with that. It doesn't matter what they could be selling, like, you know, hot cocoa, and you'll buy it because you think of the dog. So it's more about stuff like that. But I think it is a good way of illustrating some of those ways that humans are predictably irrational.
I like that. You also have to train for uncertainty. You have to incorporate uncertainty into your training and your training syllabi when you're creating training for others. And with that uncertainty, I want you to account for training scars, right? Some common training scars, and specifically from unarmed combat training, jiu-jitsu or Krav Maga or whatever, you need to account for that your opponent is following competition rules. Not true in the real world, right? That you will be evenly matched in terms of size and weight, numbers of people fighting, evenly matched with weapons. Not true in the real world. Compliance and non-compliance. At any point in a fight, the other guy might decide to start complying or not, or feign complying. And you have to have that figured out, right? In jiu-jitsu, if someone taps out, they're done. In real life, if they tap out, they might be screwing with you. Right? And that's a thing that we have to account for. And I don't say any of that to knock on jiu-jitsu or knock on any martial arts. I think they're important. But what I want is you to take the principles out of them and not just get totally down the rabbit hole of what you're being taught to do in them, right? Further, I want you to think about environmental factors. And we talked about this in the Fog and Friction episode, as far as if you've done all your training on a mat, all of a sudden doing it on asphalt or gravel, doing it in the rain, doing it in a very crowded or confined space. Fighting in a car is different from fighting on a mat, right? And I also want you to consider experience scars. Your next fight isn't necessarily going to go like your last one. Or the next big crisis your agency is in isn't going to necessarily replicate the last one, right? I imagine the Littleton Police Department or the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office has done a lot of thinking about school shootings in the last 20 years. They have probably thought a lot about that. I'm curious. If you're not
familiar, those are the agencies that were involved in Columbine back in the day.
Yep.
Columbine shooting.
I'm curious whether they have accounted for, some other totally disconnected incident, a mass casualty like a train crash, that they might have to respond to and react to, right? And so your next crisis isn't necessarily going to look like your last one.
The opposite of all of this is, just because you've never had a problem with your Serpa holster doesn't mean that you're going to continue to not have problems with your Serpa holster, for example.
Yep.
Just because you don't ever use that thing. It's one of my favorite fantasy things when you talk about experiences. Well, I've never had a problem. Well, you've never challenged it.
Yep. Mike and I did a kind of an informal poll, speaking of all this, with some of our smart gun friends, the types of people who figured out the Serpa holster problems back in the day. And we said, hey, smart gun friends, big trainers in the communities and stuff, what are the fantasies that you think people really get suckered into? And this is not an inclusive list, but it is informative. One example is carjacking. Carjackings happen, they're a threat. What do we do about them? Well, the answer a lot of gun nuts came up with was having a magnet holster, like sticking a gun under the dashboard of your car. Well, it turns out because of the geometry of cars and where your attacker is going to be coming from, having the gun out in front of you is probably not all that helpful to begin with. And also, you'll tend to leave a gun in your car. And that's an easy way to arm the bad guys when they break into cars. So let's not do that. There was a big
idea there. Just to expand on that is, if I've got a gun on me, on my person, and I'm dealing with somebody that's outside of my car, at some point, I'm trying to put that gun between me and that person. So reaching across your driver's compartment to try to access something is not ideal, especially if you consider that you're strapped into that thing. So you already have too many steps to deal with. I mean, I'm not saying that you're never going to just like shoot somebody from the driver's seat, but again, that's part of the fantasy, is that you're not going to have to feign compliance potentially to get to that point, right? And so leaving that gun there and assuming that it's secure enough, and we're not even going down the path. The other thing I've heard a lot of people talk about is how they take their gun and they put it, if they're driving home from work, they put it under their leg and they drive with it so it's right here, and if you get in a crash, that thing's gonna go flying, it's unsecured, it's not, the trigger's not protected, all these other things. I mean, it's just not a good idea. So keep it simple. A big, perhaps an even more practical point about having a quote-unquote car holster is how much you're practicing your draw, right? In dry fire training, you can work on your draw to first shot on an attacker and get that down close to or under a second. Well, how often are you taking your car with your truck gun and your car holster magnet thing out to the range to go get your sub-second draw to first shot from there? I mean, it's just not practical. There's too many other scenarios. A lot of those carjackings, they don't happen at a red light, right? They happen on your approach to the car or as you're getting out of the car. Some of them happen at red lights. I'm not saying that's never gonna be the case, but you can't assume that you're gonna go diving into your car for your car holster. You have to have that thing on you,
especially if you're getting physically dragged out of your car to begin with, right? If you're already in the tussle, because they're not typically going to try and give you a lot of warning. Another thing, as far as not super practical, there was a big push, I don't know, it was about 5 years ago, about the rifle is the king of all fighting. And the only reason you have a pistol is to fight to get to your rifle. There's a little bit of truth to that. If I'm going to be in a gunfight, I want a rifle. That's true. But I'm not expecting to get in a gunfight most days. And I'm probably not going to carry a rifle across the parking lot at the supermarket every day. Right? So the pistol is there for the short notice or no notice crisis, which is how most criminal victimization happens.
And from a law enforcement standpoint, this is something that's important to consider, because if you look at the stats on law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty, again, going back to the data thing and how we look at our risk management, this is why a lot of police officer body armor, the armor that we typically wear, is rated just for handguns. And although most of us nowadays have rifle armor, we're not getting out of the car with it on a regular basis. It's something that's used for specific situations. But part of what drives that is that most of those attacks happen with handguns. Handguns are what most criminal offenders are going to be armed with. And the reason I bring this up is the why. Why do you think that is? Well, because they can conceal them. They have them on their person. They're readily accessible. All the reasons that make your pistol such a practical tool. Where are you going to put your rifle? In the trunk of your car? I mean, one, it's going to get stolen there, obviously. But two, you got to get to it. There has to be an ongoing and active threat to your life still at the time that you get to your gun, to your rifle. How often is that really a thing for most people? Almost never.
What life choices are you making that is getting you getting you into protracted gun battles?
Yeah, like I like to go to parties too, but Jesus. Yeah. I mean, so that's the thing, is that at the point that you've made it to your car, what should you be doing? Leaving. not being there anymore. So the thing about your pistol is that it's with you, it's on you for the split seconds that matter, that you need it right then and there. If you make it to your car, you shouldn't be getting back into that fight. Now, I'm not saying there's never going to be a scenario, but in terms of the risk management thing, going back to the beginning, I mean, I better be in great physical shape and health and all those other things before I really am thinking about the scenario I might get into where I have to fight my way to my rifle. Now, again, if I'm an on-duty police officer, that's different.
Yep.
But for most everyday citizens to like have your truck gun that you need to get back to, come on.
And speaking of the superhero fantasy, which is a recurring theme, though, I've heard it called the Walter Mitty fantasy. That I think is before my time, but
shout out to Lee for that one. I hadn't even heard that prior to today.
It's a good one, but I literally had to Google it just because I didn't know the reference that well. But the notion that you're going to intervene against an active shooter in a crowded mall or movie theater effectively with a pocket gun and little or no training. Now, I'm going to caveat this. I'm a gun guy. I'm all for carrying guns, and specifically so that you have a choice and a chance. That said, your chance against a guy with an AK-47 with your little Ruger 380, pocket gun isn't great. And you need to be realistic about that.
And part of what makes it not great isn't just how well you can shoot. It's the rules that you play by versus the other guy.
Yep.
And this is something that Jim brought up earlier about essentially, and I'll change the words up a little bit on you just so it's something you'll remember, and that is that the enemy gets a vote. And this is part of the whole OODA loop thing, is that your orientation drives your decision making. And if you are a responsible, lawful gun owner, and you are there for all the right reasons from a moral and ethical standpoint, as well as a legal one, you have to be deliberate about the rounds that you send down range. And shooting that guy with the AK, he gets to just spray and pray because his morals and whatever else are out the window, right? Lawfulness and all that. So you're playing by different rules. And so you have to make sure that you're factoring that into, okay, is this a shot that I really think that I'm going to make? And you have to train and prepare and carry accordingly. I used to have a little pocket gun that I got rid of because I'm like, I could carry it, but the circumstances that I'm going to use it are too limited for what I want to be ready to deal with. So make sure that you're factoring those things in.
And your training has to match your fantasy, right? If you think you're going to make the superhero shot, well, get to the range, get into a bunch of classes, right? Your performance needs to match your fantasy. And you're not going to get there on the couch. Next one is the notion that your attacker will be a total stranger. And this is where data makes a big difference. If you look at, the National Crime Victimization Survey and Uniform Crime Reports, one of the things you're going to find is most victims of most violent crimes know their attacker. In fact, most of them live with their attacker. Most of them are related to their attacker. It just is what it is. Now, there's some demographic things about who those victims are, but in total, you're probably going to know that person. Speaking of, the attacker is probably going to look like you. People attack people within their demographic groups in most cases. You also have to account for the fact that your attacker might be not the demographic you're picturing. Whatever it is might be different, right? Could be a chick. She could be pregnant. Could be a guy with his kids standing next to him. Could be an 80-year-old war vet with dementia. And your scenarios have to account for that in your training, your preparation. What are you going to do? You're going to shoot the guy with Alzheimer's? Really? You might have to. There are conditions under which that might be warranted. But don't just picture, the 20-year-old tweaker. What if it's a 12-year-old tweaker? The next one is that you're going to see the fight coming at all. That you're going to have some substantial warning. You're going to have time to get your gun out. You're going to have time to go put your body armor on. And it turns out most bad guys are bad guys, and they're not going to give you a whole lot of warning. And they're specifically going to exploit a thing called ambiguity, right? Where you don't know one way or the other whether they're good or bad. They're going to feign being one of the good guys. They're going to ask you for help. They're going to say, I'm sorry, can you help me? I lost my dog. Or I'm sorry, can you help me? What time is it? Or do you have a smoke? Do you have a light? They're going to use some innocuous, relatively plausibly innocent way to get close enough to you to be a threat to you.
One of the seeing it coming things is also related to what Jim said about the demographics and the fact that it could be someone that you know. And a key thing into this is like workplace violence. What is your guard like around the workplace where you tell all your buddies about how big of a badass you are and how you got your EDC this and your that, and you got a truck gun out in the truck, and your attacker ends up being like one of your bros? You're telling me that if you hang out with a bunch of military-aged males, that one of them doesn't maybe have PTSD and a drinking problem, whose wife just left him, and all the whatever other factors are in place, that he's losing his job and something, and he's going to go take it out on the workplace?
Or he's a fucking sociopath. He doesn't even need all those things, right?
Well, right. But that's part of, again, being on the lookout, keeping those warning signs on the radar, those opportunities for early intervention. All the fantasy stuff is only one side of the table, but I think there's opportunities here to maybe prevent problems before they happen if you're just paying attention.
Absolutely. And the final one from our informal poll was the notion that your attacker is going to be committed, as in is going to fight you to the bitter end. They might fight until you put up some defense and they realize you ain't worth it, and they're going to bolt. And then now what? And this is a thing in military tactics quite a bit, is in Afghanistan or Iraq, the assumption that someone's going to shoot at you and you have to go close with and destroy them. The bad guys who are still alive in Iraq and Afghanistan are typically not stupid. And so they will take some pot shots at you and then toss away their gun and then bolt like bunny rabbits. And then you're chasing down some unarmed dude who's now in the crowd. And you have to think through how you're going to handle him, right? Or if you're even going to bother chasing him. It's a different discussion. And remember, through all of this, again, the other guy has decisions to make. What ties those scenarios together from our survey, and what ties the previous scenarios that we talked through together, is the assumptions that went into creating them and the effect that they have, which is a slow and rigid OODA loop, a slow and rigid algorithm for how to handle things. And there are some historical examples of how bad this really can get. Classic one is Pearl Harbor, where Navy officials fixated, previous to the surprise attack from Japan, they fixated on the threat of sabotage. That was what they were really worried about, was that the Japanese were going to maybe sneak in and mess with the airplanes. And so one of the things they did was they spread out all the airplanes on the parking ramp so that they could see if someone was moving around them, which turns out made it easier to bomb them. And the idea of a surprise attack, one of the things that made it a surprise attack, was Navy officials who were, considering the defense of the Pacific Fleet, really didn't think through the idea the Japanese could do an aircraft carrier attack on Hawaii, right? In fact, one of the famous quotes from Admiral Kimmel, who was the guy who kind of took the bad rap out of Pearl Harbor, was him saying, "How could they possibly be Japanese planes in the middle of the attack?" Like, well, here's the thing. The bad guys get a vote, right? Now, another thing to consider, though, is what assumptions did the Japanese make about the United States? So one of my favorite sayings with all of this like fantasy stuff is, what did you think was going to happen? Right? So when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, what did they think the United States was going to do? They think we're going to be like, oh, our bad. We're just going to back off and let you have the Pacific, rim. Well, turns out we killed a whole lot of Japanese people and firebombed Tokyo and dropped a sunshine bomb on Hiroshima and then a sunshine bomb on Nagasaki, right? So the way the Japanese saw that playing out, I think, was different from what happened in reality. And that's important. And I want you to think about that as we talk about these individual tactical scenarios. As you picture the Walmart parking lot or a road rage escalation, how do you see that escalation going, right? Some guy offends you and you clock him. Is he just going to be like, oh, my bad, you clocked me, so I'm just going to let you go? Or is he going to pull out a gun? And have you accounted for that in your little fantasy for fluffing yourself up? And where I see that happen a lot is like neighborhood feuds. Neighbors are the worst people to have feuds with because you can't get away from each other, right? And they tend to escalate and escalate and escalate. As it happens, I'm going through that right now with a neighbor. Got to the neighborhood. This guy shows up at my door. He says, "You don't have kids, do you?" And I'm like, "I sure do." And he's like, "They make noise." I'm like, "Well, that's true." And he's like, "You don't have dogs, do you?" I'm like, "I sure do." He's like, "I don't like them either. They make noise." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I have dogs."
This is going to be fun.
Yeah. And
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. And a month or two in, I'm TDY on a training trip. And he calls the cops, sends the cops to my door because the dogs were barking because my wife went to the gym. And my bad for my dogs barking. Totally my bad. I want to be a good neighbor and not have, not be the nuisance barking dog guy. I got that. But his first plan was to call the cops, sending a cop to my door. And depending on your worldview about that, like sending a man with a gun to your door is a signal, is a message, right? And there are a couple different ways I could take that. I could say, my bad. I'm going to be a responsible citizen. I'm going to get my dogs under control. I'm going to exercise them more. I'm going to put a bark collar on them, whatever. Now, what if I'm not a responsible citizen? How do I react to that? So he made a lot of assumptions about me and that I would be mature and responsible and conscientious. Not every neighbor you have is gonna Not every neighbor you have is gonna be though, right? So another scenario about how'd you think that was gonna happen? September 11th, 2001. So day of, NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the military organization responsible for the air defense of Canada and the United States. What were they looking at? Were they looking at airliners that day? Turns out we know pretty definitively, no, they effing weren't. They were looking for bombers. They were looking for cruise missiles. There's a great book about that called The Ground Truth by John Farmer. And it talks about how we had built our air defenses around a scenario, a fantasy, it turned out, that the Russians were going to fly their bombers across the Arctic Circle and shoot a bunch of cruise missiles at us and kick off World War III. So that didn't happen. We know it didn't happen, wasn't going to happen. It may eventually happen. We don't know. We know that when we got really attacked on 9/11, what happened was airliners. Again, how did Osama bin Laden see that panning out? Did he achieve his desired effects? Okay. So I always want you to think, when you're picturing the scenario, how do you see this going? And why? What are you basing it on? And consider always your opponent has a picture in his head of how it's going to go also. And one of the best things you can do, like the Sun Tzu, know your enemy and know yourself thing, is how does your opponent see it going? What assumptions is he making about you? And that might help you be the adult and help you make decisions faster. So that was a lot of good thoughts. What I want you to do is think about what we can do about this. Well, one is we can incorporate more variables in our visualization and rehearsal, right? Account for more branches on the tree of how things could go. Now, you can drive yourself crazy with all the different little permutations. You don't have to do that. But at minimum, think, what are his options? And then plan through all the decisions he could make, right? He decides to fight. What are you going to do? What is he going to do? What could he do? He decides to freeze. What's he going to do, and what are you going to do about it? He decides to flee. He bolts like a bunny rabbit. Now what? You going to chase him? You're going to stand there. He does some sort of a feign, or he faints, right? Whatever those things are, think through what you're going to do about it. Don't just picture it going one way. Try to work it through all the ways. Build out that decision tree. Build out your outline. Well, what's the term you use, Mike, about it's about growth and education? You're trying to build out your outline.
Yeah, where I stole that from was Joshua Whiteskin. His way of describing it is making smaller circles.
Okay.
And I don't know. I guess I'm kind of editorializing on it and coming to my own conclusions. Because I only say that because I don't want to misquote what he intended with it. But
we're gonna paraphrase and interpret a little bit.
Yeah, but I look at it like, you've got your bullet points in the outline, and you got your sub points, and then each sub point goes down to, and so you're just building that up and adding more detail and nuance to each part of that and filling it out. So that applies to everything. If you think about like, okay, survival, that's like your big picture, topic. And then you've got Maslow's hierarchy, right? And you've got, you could sit there and go through like food, water, shelter, and then you can look at what happens in terms of security. What do the outside threats look like? What about groups? How do you deal with groups and social standing? And so you kind of just tease out little layers to it and look at it like that. But yeah, I stole that general theme from that book, The Art of Learning by Joshua Whiteskin.
I like it in the context of building out your algorithm, right? You start big picture and then you work into finite detail. Next, it sounds so trite, but like challenge assumptions. Well, what the hell does that mean? Think about when you build a plan or when you build training, you build a scenario, think about every assumption you're making. Where did it come from? Is it grounded in something useful? Is it grounded in something that you can verify with data? And also, what if you're wrong about that assumption? How dangerous is that, and how likely is that, right?
I've got a couple examples of that. One is at some point in my career, I started thinking more critically about my reloads and pistol manipulation and reloads. And when we were taught, and in fact, the way that the post standards are still written are to teach slide lock reloads where, you grab over the top of the slide with your hand to pull the slide back and let it go forward rather than using the slide release because it was more reliable and quote unquote gross motor skills and all of these things. And what occurred to me at some point was like, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I keep seeing all these really good shooters not do that.
Yep.
And so you got to start like asking yourself. And so if you talk to a lot of police trainers, they'll have some, the gross motor skills and, they'll have some reason, right? Like,
yep.
Don't just stop there. Like, okay, but is it though? I mean, and so one that John Correa, Active Self Protection, we mentioned his channel earlier. One thing that he did in one of his extra channel videos a while back was he looked at the way that people hold their rifles and specifically where you put the stock of your rifle and how you position your head and something like that. I might be oversimplifying that, but just bear with me. But he looked at, supposedly it had to do with recoil management. And so he started putting it on a timer, and he was seeing how fast his follow-up shots, and he was using a Mantis, by the way. One of our sponsors has a little device, the X10, that you can put on your rifle that can track your recoil. It'll look at the degree of movement and your recovery time between shots. It's pretty interesting data. But he did a little experiment at the range. He put his rifle in different positions, and he shot using the Mantis and was able to measure with some degree of accuracy with the Mantis. I'm not saying it was a collegiate study or anything like that, but just at least an experiment with a hypothesis that it made little difference with like an AR-15 rifle that doesn't have, frankly, all that much recoil. And what he found was like, yeah, it doesn't really matter. Put it where you want. I mean, it's wherever you're comfortable, I guess, but don't overcomplicate what you're doing when you're practicing for the sake of this idea, this fantasy, if you will, that you're going to better manage your recoil because some operator did it, at whatever point in their life or their career. We have to challenge those things. That's the idea here, is that, yeah, it sounds trite, but be willing to answer those questions. Why does it make a difference? How has it been tested? How do we know that those things are true? Are there other variables that we could change to change those things? I mean, you just got to be that guy, I guess. I hate to say it, but challenge those things. Just challenge those ideas.
Yeah. And also figure out how they apply to you. Apply data, big data, to your own personal risk matrix. Where do you go in a typical day? What threats do you personally face? How often are the houses in your area getting home invaded? How often are carjackings happening in your town? Or armed robberies, or whatever? And just because they don't happen very often doesn't mean you don't have to account for them. But you do need to have, grounded in reality, a sense of how all of those statistics really apply to you. And Mike brought this up about having to test your ideas and challenge your ideas. A couple ways you can do that. One is you keep an open mind. Another way to say that is keep an open OODA loop. Be open to the fact that you could be wrong. That would be huge for the internet. Just being open to the idea that you could be wrong. Okay? I was wrong for a long time about a lot of things. I'm still probably wrong about a lot of things. One thing I got in my head because of gross motor skills and, well, the operators were doing or whatever, the Israelis for a long time were doing empty chamber pistol draws. So you draw the gun, charge the gun, and then you present it to shoot. I got it in my head that was a really good idea, and it made sense because, well, I saw it in a movie. And turns out it's a fucking stupid idea. It just is. And we can prove that. We can test it. We can go to the range and we can figure out how long it takes you to get a bullet on target. And we also know that 1 million cops across the United States don't do it that way, and they don't have negligent discharges at a super high rate or anything like that. So the juice versus the squeeze just doesn't work out for it. But it took me a long time to figure out that I was wrong.
But one of the things on that is that the possible flip side, and I agree, by the way, if anyone's listening to this and there's any conflict of their mind of how they should be carrying their gun, it should have a round in the chamber all the time. I mean, if you're carrying it at least, but frankly, the way I even my guns that I carry on a regular basis, like my work gun lives in my holster with the round in the chamber, period. My carry gun, it stays locked up in a holster with the round in the chamber, so that if I put it on, I don't have to spend a whole lot of time out of the holster manipulating that thing. It is just a given that there is a bullet in the chamber. That's just my philosophy. You do you. But where I was going to say with the whole Israeli thing, with the no round in the chamber thing, and where that might have played in is maybe they had a bunch of 19-year-old recruits that kept putting, they had poor management with their, poor trigger discipline and whatever, and they kept putting rounds where they shouldn't have been. And they made this decision where it goes, you know what? Maybe these assholes just can't be trusted with a bullet in the chamber.
There were assumptions they had to make. That's true.
Right. And so that was that was their math. I'm not here to do your math for you. Yeah. But you have to ask yourself, if you need that gun, how quickly are you going to need it? And do you have time to fuck around with putting a round in the chamber? And for me, that math is no, I don't have time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. So again, you do your own math and understand where it's coming from, but some boss, some bureaucrat somewhere probably came up with that policy for some reason. And for all I know, hey, maybe more guys were getting hurt because they had crappy holsters, or because their guns were out of spec, or poorly maintained, or they had bad training and were walking around with their fingers on triggers. Who knows? The idea is you have to be looking at external inputs and challenging those ideas. You've got to be asking yourself those questions now. If you know people do it, you have to ask those questions.
Another thing you can do is go get training that demands force on force, where you're shooting sims at each other or something very much like it, or physical force, like fighting against someone who is actively fighting against you, because you will learn really quickly which one of your fantasies isn't working. Right? You may wildly overestimate your ability to fight on the ground. You might wildly overestimate your ability to get the gun out and working when someone's fighting you for it.
Or retain
Or retain it, yeah. And that's where a program like ECQC, and we've talked about that in previous episodes by Craig Douglas, is worth going to. Next is talk about your scenarios with smart people who are not inclined to agree with you. Right? Murder board what you're thinking through. If you're building a training scenario, talk to 5 or 6 experienced operators in that field and say, hey, this is what I want to train guys to. What do I have wrong? What's not matching the reality as you know it? And some of those operators should be from outside your little sub-community. So if you're from Austin PD, don't just talk to Texans. Talk to, for lots of good reasons, talk to...
We know they do shit weird.
Yeah, talk to some Florida cops because they've seen some shit. Talk to some LA cops. Talk to some like Philadelphia and DC cops.
And I mean that with all love towards my Texas friends. I'm just saying they ain't playing over there. They ain't effing around.
God bless Texas. But seek out ideas from outside of your little sub-community. And same with seek out ideas from the competition community, the military community, and they won't all fit you well. That's okay. But at least the diversity of thought, diversity, weird buzzword, but this is where it's huge, is talking to people who see the world a little differently, who face slightly different challenges from you. You might start picking up some things that maybe you've got wrong. If you are training to a specific scenario at a police academy or at pilot training or whatever, you should be able to explain why you're training against that scenario. Is it because the last, half of your police shootings went a certain way? Is it because the last time we had a plane get shot down, it was because this missile shot it down? Be able to explain it. Do the homework on how you got to that scenario. Another thing in training that I always recommend is having serious opposition force and serious role players. Have guys who can follow a script, but be willing to go off script every once in a while and get creative when you've got students who are prepared for that, right? And we've talked about that in previous episodes. And finally, I want you to capture and train the lessons learned. If something didn't go the way you thought it was going to go, figure out why. If you have a SWAT call out that doesn't go the way it's supposed to, figure out why. Where did the training go wrong? What didn't you account for in your training? So, some truisms that will keep you out of trouble on this stuff. And truisms are tricky, right? Because I like to say it's trite because it's true. You've heard a lot of these probably already. That's okay. They're truisms because people have found value in them, because they can get you out of the little mind traps that get you into these fantasies, right? So one that Mike already brought up is always assume there's a +1. You're in a fight with somebody. That's cool. Is it possible there's a guy behind you? Is it possible that there's another guy hiding in whatever room you're clearing?
The thing about truisms that I want to touch on, and Jim said if they're trite, they're true, and people find value in them and all of that. Back to the challenging assumptions thing. These are truisms, and they're things that, again, going back to principles versus methods. These principles are there for a reason, but we have to be deliberate in how we apply this. A +1 rule is useful if I'm searching a building and I find a guy and I'm thinking about, well, there might be another guy in here, so I should make sure. But at the same time, if you're in a situation where you are face to face with a guy that might try to kill you, it doesn't mean that you should be like, hold on a minute, and go look under a couch or something like that. You should still be dealing with the most important task.
That's fair.
In that moment.
The reason I bring it up is because I found myself in a scenario at least once where a guy in a parking lot kept trying to back me up in between two cars. He was running some sort of con scheme, and I realized at some point he was trying to get me in between two cars. And it occurred to me, he's got all of my attention, and there might be a guy coming up behind me.
Sure.
And he's specifically trying to distract me, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not discounting. Obviously, the rule exists for a reason, right? Or the principle, I should say. Pardon me. But what I'm saying is, what I don't want is, this is part of the tactical fantasy stuff too. Is the telephone game that gets played when people are like, "Well, you always got to do the +1 rule, so you have to do some stupid theatrics when you're out on the range and do your little scanning bit every time you get in a shooting and dance around like an idiot." No, okay, look, the +1 principle is there for a reason, and you have to apply that in context.
Yep.
But it doesn't take your priorities are still going to be your priorities. And so it's like there's a video out of Colorado from a few years back. I brought up the shots fired on the radio thing, right? Where every cop is pictured in their head. Okay, and then I'm going to do this, and then this is going to happen. And this guy gets butt stroked with a rifle, and he falls on his ass, and he shoots. Yeah, the cop does, and he shoots the guy. And he's on the radio yelling, shots fired, and he's like still on the ground on his ass. And I'm like, maybe do that, like maybe get up to your feet first and worry about the radio. Because, yeah, I mean, calling for help is important, but you have a problem to deal with that's 5 or 10 or however many feet away. That's probably more pressing than getting on the radio. And so I just want to make sure that we're not getting too, when we say these things are truisms, that we're not setting anybody up to play that telephone game or anything. So
that's valid.
Again, go back to methods versus principles. These are things to think about when you're having your little fantasy about whatever is going to happen and you're teasing out an algorithm, that these are some principles to apply, right?
I like that.
Consider that it's not just the one guy. There might be other guys. How do you deal with that? Well, it might mean that, like, well, you'll get to him when you get to him, but right now you got to deal with this one. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about that, and that we're avoiding this, like, another slow is smooth, smooth is fast thing or something.
Yep.
So anyway, so that's one. That's
valid.
One is the +1 thing, but there's caveats, right? Asterisk, if you will.
Yeah, and it might be better just to couch this under the account for uncertainty. You don't know necessarily how many assailants you're going to deal with, right? Next is, you don't know what's in his heart or in his pockets. You don't know. You don't know whether he intends to murder you. You don't know whether he intends to steal from you. You don't know. You don't know. You don't know what he's trying to do. You don't know his background. All you know is what he's presenting to you, right? Next is, don't confuse enthusiasm for capability. If you haven't trained to it, don't expect to be able to do it. If that's fighting off a carjacker in your car, if you haven't trained to it, don't expect to be able to do it. If that's making the golden shot across a crowded shopping mall with your pocket pistol, don't expect to be able to do it if you haven't trained to it.
Your little 380.
If you're 380. Next is, don't confuse the unfamiliar with the unlikely. And that's a quote I stole from Roberta Wohlstetter. She did probably the definitive analysis of Pearl Harbor. And a lot of the stuff I talk about from Pearl Harbor, I stole from her. And she said, we got so fixated on it going one particular way, and we got so inundated with noise versus signal, right? So there were so many little points of intelligence coming in that were scattering us and our attention all over the Pacific, that we didn't even consider, because it was unfamiliar, the possibility the Japanese could use aircraft carriers to conduct an air raid against us suddenly. We didn't even think about it. Not because it wasn't likely, because it was. Turned out that was the most likely thing. That's what they actually did. But it's not what we wanted to think about. Next is, don't mirror or project your own rule set onto him. And I thought Mike made a great point about, he is not constrained the way you are as far as civilian casualties and collateral damage go, right? You have something to lose. You have a job, a career. you have a family, you have a mortgage. The types of people who are going to pick a fight with you for fun often don't have anything to lose. And one that I stole from the medical community, I think it was in Scrubs or Grey's Anatomy. It is actually taught in the medical world too, just to be clear. I was going to
say, the medical community. It's a TV show.
Grey's Anatomy.
I watched ER once, and so I'm basically a doctor.
Hey, the tactical fantasy, right? But as it happens, in addition to being on TV, this is also a thing I've heard docs talk about, is when you hear hoofbeats, do you think a zebra or do you think a horse? Well, more likely here in the United States, it's a horse, right? That doesn't mean it can't be a zebra, but it means it's also almost certainly not a unicorn. So if you have your scenario playing out only so that if you get this one stimulus, you assume it's a unicorn, you're probably making too many assumptions.
I've heard a lot of tactical nerds talk about if it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's probably a fucking duck. I don't know. That's just, it sounds really cool when you say something like that on the range.
Yeah, it's good.
I don't know.
It's a good truism, right? Yeah. But consider most likely versus most dangerous. The most likely scenarios you're going to run into are the guy's an idiot and he's being overly emotional and hostile and he feels wronged. And a reasonable apology and a sign of respect will save you a lot of pain and save him a lot of pain, and everyone will go home just fine. Or he's a tweaker and he's trying to steal your stereo or whatever it is people have these days, your iPhone. And he's not necessarily trying to kill you. He doesn't necessarily want to kill you. He just wants your stuff so he can go buy more dope, right? Those are the most likely scenarios. He's probably not a serial killer. He's probably not a mass murderer.
And he's probably looking for the person who is not paying attention to their surroundings. There's some target selection that happens that if you just pay attention to your world, you get yourself out of a lot of problems that you'll never need your EDC, your spare magazine. That's one of my, speaking of tactical fantasies,
yep.
You know, having an extra magazine of ammo as if you're likely to pull out the gun in the first place. I mean,
I carry 270 rounds everywhere I go.
Right. I mean,
yeah,
but no flashlight, no medical equipment, no OC spray. And for the record, I don't carry OC spray or frankly a lot of that stuff on me on a day-to-day basis, but depending on where I'm going and what I'm doing, I might.
So I have a saying about that, little truism also. I use my superior pilot judgment to keep myself out of situations that would require my superior pilot skill or luck or golden hands, right?
Right.
So use good judgment to keep yourself out of these situations that are going to require you to employ your truck gun. My final thought is I want you to be very, very careful about the assumptions and visualizations, specifically the ones that are going to drive you to either escalate or de-escalate. Where this will get you into a lot of trouble is force decisions. Is when you're deciding, yeah, I'm going to up my force with this guy, or I'm going to back off with this guy. You need to consider what are the options available to him, what's his most likely course of action, and what's his most dangerous course of action. And have you thought through what you're going to do if he decides not to play your game by your rules? Because people be crazy.
People be crazy. That's true. One of the things that has stood out the most, and Jim mentioned it earlier, but guys like Cecil Birch and Craig Douglas and some of these other people in those circles, when they do their legit entangled gunfighting, self-defense type training, they've got a whole segment where they talk about managing unknown contacts, which is a huge component of whatever your fantasy self-defense scenario is. The communication skills, the balance between not being inflammatory, but also being confident and assertive.
Yep.
Right? Like finding a way of escalating or de-escalating in a way that doesn't make your problem worse, but makes it more controllable for you or advantageous for you. There's a lot of different elements to that. But, this is where I'm going with this is your preparation has to go way, way beyond the hard skills. Sure, you can learn how to fight, you can learn how to shoot, you can measure those things with trophies and tournaments and shooting qualification scores and any number of things. Those hard skills are fine, right? They're fine, whatever.
And they're fun. Carbine work is easy and it's fun. And you hit the paper target and you feel like you're a badass. And
man, look at those holes. Those are like impressive holes, right?
And in many cases, all you're doing is cosplay. You're a Fallujah reenactor, right? And
yeah, totally.
What I want you to do is get some speaking skills, just like Mike's saying.
Right. And the soft skills, that's where I'm going with this, is being aware of your surroundings, being able to communicate, being able to read people, being able to convey to your family or your friends how you want to handle a situation, and thinking about just basic conflict resolution. How do you interact with your neighbor in a way that, this is stuff that you can't measure in a chart or a spreadsheet. It all, frankly, boils down to just being a decent human. And it's amazing, where I got a lot of skills from that related to my work in law enforcement was actually customer service. And new cops never want to hear that. Like, we're not serving pizzas here, It's like, no, but when I managed a pizza restaurant back in the day, and a customer would call and they'd be pissed off because they asked for no mushrooms and we put mushrooms on their pizza. A lot of my ability to like calm them down and in that phone call happy is the sort of thing that I still use on a traffic stop today when some a-hole that I pull over is like, why'd you pull me over? I didn't do that. You're just harassing me and this and that and the other thing. I employ those same skills that I used at a pizza joint back in the day. So, ground those fantasies and just in those sorts of things. And everyone listening to this show has dealt with little versions of these problems. Maybe not the epic gun battle, the Fallujah thing that Jim's talking about, but they've had disagreements with people at work or at school. They've had awkward, difficult conversations with people. They've had conflicts with their spouse or a drunk uncle or whatever that they've had to deal with. And those are the things that you should draw on when you start planning and thinking about how these things are going to go. And that, I think we're primarily addressing the self-defense crowd a little bit when we talk about some of those things, but it also applies to the cop that thinks that he's basically an on-duty operator or whatever, and not just a police officer who's a cop from 9 to 5 on weekdays, and then the rest of the time he's just some dude.
You got to know when to be the golden retriever and when to be the sheepdog or whatever the hell, right? Like,
yeah. But yeah, ground that stuff and just being a decent human, and I think that goes a long way. And again, think about the difference between methods and principles. I think if you're thinking about yourself as like, hey, this is about surviving, not about proving how big of a deal I am or proving how cool I am, that's going to drive your fantasy play in a lot of ways. Taking care of your family, for example, hey, that's more important than like being macho, or thinking.
I like the phrase fantasy play. That's
or people thinking that there's
a website about that
or whatever.
Yeah. Another example with this is disaster prep, disaster planning, right? We have a disaster preparedness episode where I talked about, hey, sanitation is probably a bigger deal than your ability to, shoot a bunch of zombies. It turns out toilet paper was a big deal in 2020, right? Who in your disaster prep planning did you account for that? And think back, what went right and what went wrong in your preparation? I had, a bunch of MREs and stuff. We didn't end up eating MREs. We could have if it got that bad as far as being able to get food from the store, right? And there was a couple of weeks there where it looked like you may not get food from the store. And we're not all the way out of the woods on that. We're most of the way out of the woods. But who saw the toilet paper thing coming? Turns out supply chains are funny, right? And we knew that. We've talked about how supply chains are funny. Think through that as far as how you prepare for 2021. And are you preparing for COVID Part 2 in 2021? Are you preparing for the zombie apocalypse or the great meteor of death or the electromagnetic pulse that sends us all back to the 1800s where you're going to be a leather worker to feed your family? Or is it going to be the more mundane, stupid shit like hurricanes and tornadoes and wildfires, which we get every year?
Heart disease.
Car accidents.
At risk for cancer.
Yep.
Stroke. Diabetes.
And I'm telling you, look around the tactical community. Look at what we're really at risk for. We're way more at risk for type 2 diabetes than we are for zombie apocalypse.
I could lose a few pounds and get a little bit more active. I could tell you that.
Yeah.
For sure. I could get back into some jujitsu too. Got to get on that.
So speaking of that, training things I want you to look at that might help get you out of that fantasy and the role play, cosplay, play and dress up thing is take a driving class. I think knowing how to drive well and professionally is important. And there's a couple different courses you can take across the country. Find one and get into it. Take a serious first aid class. People get hurt all the time. People don't necessarily get in big mass shootings all the time, but people do get hurt. Take a class that improves your speaking skills. And ECQC might be that class. It could be Toastmasters, getting up and giving a speech. Learning how to perform vocally on command is part of your tactical skill set. I think that's all I got. I want you to just, think about if you're working on a scenario, how do you see it playing out? If you're buying body armor as a civilian concealed carrier, how do you see that playing out? What scenarios do you see that being relevant? How do you picture yourself getting it on? And once you have it on, what are you going to do then?
A lot of people I feel like nowadays are buying night vision.
Yeah.
It's like, sure, if you've got just disposable income, it's cool, but man, the things that you could do with a couple grand. I mean,
yeah.
I work on a tactical team and I have night vision issued to me from work, and I mean we use it sometimes, but Jesus, I mean, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying there's not a time and a place where there won't ever be. I'm just saying you have to make sure that you are playing the risks with the odds, a little bit.
Under what circumstances do you see that being relevant?
Yeah. And with that, we'd like to thank our sponsors for bringing you the show. Thanks to Ride-On Optics. Ride-On is bringing you high-quality HD glass from Japan and all of their scopes and red dot sights. They are a company focused on people and quality, and their products are backed by an unconditional lifetime warranty. If you ever have a problem with their products, they will replace it, not repair it. They are veteran and law enforcement owned, and you can find them at rideonoptics.com.
This episode is also brought to you by Mantis X. Mantis is a family of training devices to track your movements while you do live and dry fire training. It times and tracks everything you do in a shooting drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. You can find them on mantisx.com. And oh, by the way, few things will get you out of your fantasy faster than getting actual data on how you're actually performing. And that might be a clue.
Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money is going to go back into bringing you good content. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We are at TAC Tangents. And if you want to interact with us, the best place to do that is in the podcast discussion group on Facebook. You can find that by going to our page and looking for the groups tab, the TAC Tangents podcast group. You can also reach out to us by email, info@tacticaltangents.com. If you have feedback or questions for us, make sure you send them, and we'll try to incorporate those into an episode. And that's all I got.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear if there's some ridiculous fantasy that you think the tactical communities have gotten suckered into. Let's hear about it. Send us an email.
Yeah.
We'll talk through it on a future episode.
I mean, within some constraints. I mean, come on. I don't need, let's keep it.
I don't need to hear all your
PG.
fantasies. Yeah. I'm saying,
All right, guys.
oh my God.
All right. Good talk.
All right. All right.